One of my subscribe stars, which happens to be a transgender person, gave me this old article from several years ago from NewsWeek talking about the possibility of using a head transplant as a treatment for gender dysphoria. And they asked me to talk about what I think about this news. And it's very interesting how the press is reporting on it. Head transplants, quote unquote, could replace gender reassignment surgery. But when you actually read the article, the doctor says that he's got reservations about it because of ethical reasons. And he's not going to touch that. He's going to let society to discuss this quagmire. But notice how the news reports on science. Like, they always do this. They always try to push words into the scientist's mouth. And secondly, the scientific community as itself is very skeptical about the possibility of a head transplant. Head transplants are considered to be the answers for immortality, quote unquote. Even though technically that's not the case because the brain would still deteriorate with age. So you would not get immortality. What you would get, though, is a very senile person at the age of 110 or something like that, which is going to constantly go through the aging process of the brain. So, no, it's not immortality, but if you could actually perform this surgery safe and properly every single time, yeah, you would find a lot of cures for a lot of diseases, but it would definitely be incredibly expensive. And it would not be available for everyone simply because you would not have a high number of donors. And you would also limit the number of donors for other transplants, like, for example, liver or kidney transplant, because let's say you have a very kind and generous person which goes to the hospital and signs a consent form so that his body can be harvested after he passes away. And several months later, he gets into a motorcycle accident and he is declared to be brain dead. Now, his body can satisfy a lot of customers, as the doctors like to say. You can have his liver given to one person, his kidney given to two other people. There is a lot of harvesting to be done. But if you have a head transplant, then the waiting lists of all those other people are going to be artificially increased because now there's less organs to go around, which is why the surgery is going to be incredibly expensive. And it's also going to be reserved for a very small number of clinical conditions. So the grandmother who's 110 years old and wants to live 20 more years is probably not going to get the head transplant. It's probably going to be for young people that are suffering from fatal illnesses, people with their entire life ahead of them. And those are probably the ones that are going to get it as long as they're also incredibly rich in order to afford it. Because, this is not going to be sponsored by the taxpayer money. I don't think the NHS would be able to afford sponsoring such a surgery because, again, it's about the money. So you're treating one person with the money you could probably treat 100 other people. That's what public healthcare is like. They always make these types of decisions. It's about treating the largest number of people rather than treating a few rare conditions that only one person can benefit from. So from ethical standpoint, I don't think gender dysphoria people are going to benefit from this surgery, even if it was possible and even if they wanted it. Simply because it would be considered an illness that's not as severe as others. Right? From what I understand, despite what the activists like to call you, gender dysphoria is not a fatal illness like leukemia, even though the suicide rate is high. I mean, there's other ways medicine has in order to prevent people from harming themselves. This is just no, I don't see, even with the political ideology and even if the activists push as hard as they can, that this type of procedure would happen to people with gender dysphoria. The only exception, though, would be, okay, you got two people with gender dysphoria, both are, healthy of body, both adults come in and they're like, okay, well, we want to swap heads, and poop, poop, and maybe that can be done if they have a lot of money, but even then it would be very difficult because of compatibility issues. Right? Transplants require the patient to be compatible with the donor. So finding like two people that are compatible is already a daunting task. Unless, of course, they're from the same family, then it might be a lot easier. But yeah, like these are the ethical implications. I'm not even going to touch the Christian implications because I know, like, in this day and age, no one cares about them. I guess, like, the Christian moral that was raised when the first head transplant was performed, it was performed on two apes, I believe. And the doctor took the head from ape A and replaced it with the head of ape B. And the question was, like, what happened with the soul of ape A, right? Because you detach the head from the body, and I guess, like, falsely, it's considered that the soul is in the heart, right? So what happens when you swap the head from one body to another? Like, does the soul come with the head, or is the soul remaining in the previous body that is now discarded? So that was like a philosophical question that Christians asked when this was performed. But now let's talk about the actual medical implications. Like, why don't we hear a lot about head transplants? Besides the fact that I've already covered the difficulty in finding a donor, and why doctors would even be reluctant on using a donor when available, because they would rather harvest the organs for other people to save as many lives as possible. The main problem with organ transplanting, and this is something that I didn't know when I started medicine either, is that even in the case of a successful transplant, let's say you get a heart transplant, or you get a liver transplant or something like that, even if the transplant takes, what ends up happening is that it will take only for a couple of years usually. You get a average year period that the transplant works. So I believe for a heart transplant, unless the science advanced, when I was in med school, it was like 10 to 15 years. So even if the transplant takes and everything is great, after 10 or 15 years, the body starts rejecting the heart. Which is why heart transplants is usually recommended for more elderly people, because, okay, you're 70 years old, you get a heart transplant, which is going to last you for 10 or 15 more years. It's kind of expected that people aren't going to live past the age of 85 on average, at least in my country. So it's not considered a burden for the patient. Like, he's not going to have to think about it, getting the surgery done a second time, like finding another heart for the person. So you're just prolonging the life of a patient that's suffering from a fatal illness anyway. But yeah, like, that's the thing. With most transplants, you have, if you will, a time period while the transplant takes, and after that the body starts rejecting it, because the immune system of the body recognizes that part as being foreign. The immune system seems to be very xenophobic, so it starts attacking that thing. Now imagine if you get a hand transplant. Well, okay, if the transplant doesn't take, or the body starts rejecting it, then, all right, you just remove the hand, right? But what do you do if you have a head transplant and something goes wrong and the body doesn't take it? Well, then it's going to start attacking, the immune system is going to attack the head, which is going to be fatal. Or if after a while the immune system starts attacking. Take into account that the brain doesn't regenerate. So any damage done to the brain is permanent, and any damage done to the brain can often leave the patient with undesirable side effects. Maybe he loses his cognitive abilities, maybe he can't speak properly, maybe behavioral changes can happen, right? So this is why it's an incredibly risky procedure that should be reserved only for the people that are going to die anyway, like for the people that are terminally ill, and it's like a last-ditch effort to try to prolong their life. So you can't really do it to anyone because of the risks involved. And finally, it's the reason why science hasn't done it, and why there are some crazy doctors that are trying to attempt it, but normally it's not being tried, and it's not. I don't think it's going to be perfected in the next couple of years anyway. Is because when you try to reattach a body part to a missing limb, let's say a patient had an accident at work and lost 3 fingers, and the doctors try to reattach those fingers. You gotta work under very difficult conditions, because you're trying now to attach every single nerve properly, and usually, if I'm not mistaken, this is done under a microscope. So you have to attach every single nerve from that patient, which is why these surgeries can last for hours. And even then, with the patient's own fingers, they're never going to be able to move them the same like they used to. Because reattaching these microscopical nerves is a very daunting and difficult task, and you can't know when you're in the operating theater if you attached it properly or not. Like you have to wait for the patient to wake up to do the recovery, and then he will tell you if he can move the fingers properly or not, because it's not just about moving the fingers. You also need to have the sensation in the finger. You also need to make sure that the patient can feel not just the tactile sensation, but also warm and cold and heat and all of that things. So it's a very difficult procedure, even when working with the patient's own body parts and when trying to attach something small like a finger. Now imagine you're trying to attach the entire spine. We're talking about millions of neuronal endings, millions of nerves, and I don't know like how long it will take for such a procedure, but it's probably going to take more than 20 hours. Like it's going to be an entire medical team that's going to try to do this, and the chance of attaching every single nerve properly, I think it's next to impossible. I don't see it being done by a human. The only way this could probably be done is if we get access to some very smart AI that can work under these conditions, and it can attach it properly, like recognize which nerve ending goes where. Because that's another thing, like you can attach a nerve ending to another nerve ending that shouldn't be attached, so then you're not going to get the desired result. This is why it's such an overwhelmingly complicated thing that most doctors don't even attempt it. Because at the end of the day, again, like you're taking a donor, which could save several other lives, just so you can do your scientific experiment that can end up hurting the other patient. Like the head transplant cannot take, just like an arm transplant cannot take, or you can have the immune system attacking the brain of the other patient. It's horrible. So yeah, and furthermore, like the only type of head transplants that have been done, from what I know, the patient that got the head is going to be paralyzed neck down. So you will prolong the patient's life, but you're not going to prolong the patient's quality of life, which again is why most of the head transplants that were done were for people that would suffer already paralysis from neck down. People like I guess certain people that suffer from a condition similar to Hawkins, right? Like they're already paralyzed. Doesn't matter for them if they swap heads. They just want to live a little bit longer. So yeah. But it's kind of bizarre. Like the first thing you're thinking about is gender dysphoria. Like you're talking about this medical revolutionary act, which is already in a very gray moral area. And the first thing you're thinking about is like, all right, gender dysphoria. And again, like I know what the activists are claiming, that they're treating it as if it's a fatal condition because of the high suicide rates. But there are other fatal conditions with worse percentages. I'm just saying, like leukemia. Or you can have a patient like, imagine someone like Steve Hawkins, which wasn't able to use his body for the last decades of his life, and you would be able to give that person the ability to walk and talk and move again. Like wouldn't you think that person would be like, I understand the identity politics and everything, right? But like, wouldn't you think that person should be first in line though? Like, don't you think like his suffering of being stuck in a chair and unable to speak for the last decades is also a little bit more worthy of putting him up in line? And I know like this is a very difficult talking point to have. It's like who deserves getting it, because that's what doctors do, right? They have these committees and they actually talk, like they decide life and death, like who gets to have it and who doesn't, because you need to understand that if you don't have enough resources, no amount of socialism in the world is going to make it so that everyone gets it. Maybe when the science becomes to the point where we can just, I guess 3D print bodies, and it's already to the part where I guess like they can 3D print artificial organs in some cases. But it's usually, I believe, more like arteries, like the aorta and other things. I haven't heard an organ being completely 100% synthetic. Although I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually going to come up with these things. So yeah, I mean, if they can come up with the perfect synthetic body, like customized from 0 to 100%, then everyone is going to get organs. And then it's going to be a different type of medicine. I think like some Romanians in Transylvania actually managed to create artificial blood. Like that would be great if it gets mass produced and it's actually usable. Because yeah, there is a blood crisis. Donate blood, seriously. Donate blood. Go do your part. Donate blood, because like you never know when you'll need it. You know, you can go to a mountain resort and you can have a ski accident there, and then you need blood, and it's like, oh well, there's none available because no one donated. Donate blood. Do your part. Right. That's my answer. Now, the transgender community, from what I've seen in the article, the activists, of course, they're like, oh no, this is too drastic. Like we don't want this. Now, you know, like, I don't even know why you're asking the activists, because this is going to be an individual decision. Like, any type of medical surgery is going to come up to the individual. I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, some individuals might want it, some might not. You know, you never know. But no, the activists are like, no, the correct way of dealing with this is to figure out as early as possible in children when dysphoria happens, like to identify children as early as possible before puberty. That's what they say in the article. So, yeah, I mean, the activists don't like it. Okay. The person that asked me on my Subscribe Star, I don't know if they like it or not. They just asked for my opinion. So I gave you the most comprehensive opinion possible, which is what I think people should do. I'm not telling you whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm telling you the risks. I'm telling you the ethical reasons behind it. I'm trying to get you to understand this so you can make your own educated opinion, whether you would think it's a great solution or not. So let me know in the comment section what you guys think, and I'll see you on my other channel when I do another interesting video on why Genshin Impact is getting boycotted. Horrible. See you guys there.